But if you Terra that Ogerpon, Grassy Glide plus close combat can be a nasty combination.
So let's see what our trainers will lead off this top 4 match with. This is the first game, and for Luka, it's going to be the Rillaboom and the King Gambit, and for Wolfe, the Rillaboom and the Rapid Striker Shifu.
So critically here, note that the King Gambit is Dark Terra. It is not something like a Dragon Terra, so you are really vulnerable to close combat from the opposing side here. Of course, Urshifu on Wolfe's end also is the Water Terra, so you got to be worried about, of course, just super effective grass type damage coming out immediately. A lot of things to think about here as both players have pressure with Fake Out, but you can see Wolfe looking to play really aggressively here, trying to snipe down the King Gambit. A lot of different decisions to make here, but you know, King Gambit's a Pokemon that's in a weird spot right now. It's only got Dark type attack, so it's not very good into Urshifu, and so I think Luka might want to consider switching it out or protecting it, but of course protecting in front of Urshifu does not save you.
No, it doesn't feel really good either, even if you're taking just a little bit of chip, but it is going to be a Terra onto the King Gambit.
Ooh.
So you're just heavily leaning into this Dark type offensive pressure that this King Gambit can provide. You've got the stab, you've got the Dark, the black glasses. There is no Fake Out, so a quick U-turn here into the Rillaboom means that Wolfe gets to pivot this Urshifu back into its Pokeball, but what's in the back here? This is really risky.
You got it, yeah, BC. Okay, Incineroar coming in. That would activate the Defiant on the King Gambit. Wolfe says, you know what? I'll give you your attack boost. I know you've Dark Terra'd. Now the question is, where is King Gambit targeting? Oh, it's going to get boosted immediately here, though. It isn't even targeting anywhere. It could go for a Swords Dance as well. It's going to be Woodhammer, though, into the King Gambit, which just Terra'd, so a hefty amount of damage onto that slot.
And the Rillaboom's going to take a bit of recoil here, but as we see the Rillaboom fire back in response with a Woodhammer of its own, now we get a chance to see what this King Gambit is locked into, and it's going to be the Kowtow Cleave at +1 now with that Defiant boost to re-enable after the Intimidate. That's going to be a Rillaboom knockout.
Yeah, immediately takes care of the Rillaboom here, so very aggressive trades, right? Wolfe had the option to go for like close combat onto King Gambit, decides to target the Rillaboom instead, makes a nice play of Woodhammering King Gambit, so it covers for the Terra option there, but of course the King Gambit now gets the Defiant boost. However, one of the reasons Wolfe's probably not that worried about the Defiant boost is because you have Incineroar out, so now you can Fake Out onto the Gambit slot and potentially target it with Urshifu. So now the prediction is, do you want to go for the obvious play, right? Luka could predict that and of course just switch King Gambit out immediately. So yeah, King Gambit is pretty scary here, but both of Wolfe's Pokemon actually resist Dark, so that's why Wolfe's probably okay giving it that immediate Defiant boost. Even at +1 in Black Glasses, you're still not going to get a one-hit knockout, I think, onto either Pokemon.
But I wonder if Luka's okay with trading the King Gambit now. I mean, it kind of got the job done, removing one of the big pieces from Wolfe's team. And when you look at something like the Rillaboom, you're like, okay, well, now, like, that tank is gone. What can I now bring in if you're Luka that you might be okay with trading the King Gambit?
Oh, big play here, though. So the King Gambit does switch out into the Gouging Fire. We saw a shot into the Gouging Fire slot and close combat into Rillaboom. So, you know, Wolfe decided to ignore the King Gambit, saying, well, you know, I'm not that scared because I resist your attacks, and this pays off heavily.
It does. We're going to see the Photosynthesis boost, but the close combat into the Rillaboom is plenty to be able to finish it off from half HP. And now we see the Incineroar getting a chance to follow that up as well. This is a huge turn for Wolfe, taking out now the Rillaboom on Luka's side.
So you know that the close combat has been locked into on Urshifu's end. Rillaboom there also, of course, had the opportunity to go for a Grassy Glide to get some free chip damage onto Urshifu, but opts not to do so. So it feels like Luka had a really nice play on turn 1, and Wolfe kind of turning the momentum back into his favor. Gouging Fire is a really interesting option here. It's not going to be able to do that much damage, but of course can boost the attack of any physical Pokemon with that Howl. So let's see what Luka decides to bring in as the final Pokemon. If you bring your King Gambit back out, it's just vulnerable to a close combat right now.
That would be a really tough decision to make, but it is going to be the Ogerpon, so we see the 4th Pokemon for Luka. And I really like this bring into this matchup because you do now, after getting rid of the Rillaboom, maybe you feel a little bit better about just having the Ogerpon on the field.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the Furgraf gets in at the perfect time, right? Yeah, really hates going up against King Gambit, but King Gambit just switched out, so it was a really, really nice play for Wolfe to make, and could have been a little bit scary if it was just something like Sucker Punch and Grassy Glide into the Urshifu slot there. That could have spelled disaster, but Wolfe now positioning in Furgraf, and the question is, can Luka deal enough damage? Gouging Fire is not a very offensive option, but Gouging Fire goes for that Howl. We'll get an attack boost on both Pokemon. Now the question is, where is Ogerpon targeting? Spur's going to eat up the close combat, but is it going to go for a super effective Horror Leech onto Urshifu? That would heal it all the way back up, or did it read into Incineroar switching in? It read into the instant switch in! Ivy Cudgel comes out!
Oh, it's not going to be nearly enough to take out the Urshifu there, so the Hyper Voice coming out the Farigiraf. Ogerpon is able to hang on, but this Farigiraf is not taking any damage, and now it gets the special attack boost.
Yeah, that's a really great try by Luka, right? If you nail the Incineroar, adds the switches in, you get the knockout, presumably. Incineroar goes down, and then Ogerpon is really well positioned against Urshifu in the end game. If that were a Horror Leech, this game would look really different as well, because you just heal back so much and Incineroar is forced back out. But really, really nice call by Wolfe on back-to-back turns, and I think he has all the momentum right now.
I feel like there is a way maybe for Luka to get back into this one, but it's continuing to make those aggressive reads and finally getting one right. You see the Urshifu pivot here from Wolfe, and that means the Incineroar is going to be taking its place. So did Luka go for another Ivy Cudgel into that slot?
Yeah, the Hyper Voice right now is also just doing so much damage. So let's see. What is the play here? It's just to protect from Farigiraf.
So maybe Luka has an opportunity here, but it's about whether or not he puts his foot on the gas. It's going to be a breaking swipe that will not connect into the Farigiraf and also not help its damage output. But the Incineroar does have to take that before we finally get a chance to see what this
the Ivy Cudgel does come out.
Gonna do. And that's going to be
a knockout.
Incineroar.
Wow, the critical hit there. Okay, I'm not sure if that mattered. Depends on how these Pokemon were trained, but you just said it, Rose. If Luka wants to get back into this, needs to make a big play, and that was, I think, a pretty darn big play.
That is a huge play here, because now you've got this Urshifu that, yes, it gets a chance to knock out this Ogerpon, but you know, are we going to end up, like, how do you kind of deal with the rest of what's in the back?
Yeah, you know, the Hyper Voice and Psychic damage right now is huge, right? And so I don't think Urshifu is going to be fainting to either, you know, a breaking swipe or Heat Crash, and so Urshifu should survive the turn. If Urshifu faints, King Gambit actually might just end up winning against the Farigiraf. And what's really key here is the Farigiraf is blocking the Sucker Punch from the King Gambit, right? So now my question is, can two attacks from the Gouging Fire actually knock out the Urshifu? If you're able to outspeed Urshifu, you get some damage this turn and then try to get the knockout the next turn, King Gambit can then just finish off the Farigiraf. So that was a huge turn by Luka. I feel like each turn, the players are just kind of trading back and forth and bringing the momentum back into their favor. It's going to be another howl.
That feels so greedy in this position, but you want to make sure that this Gouging Fire might be set up for an end game, as a close combat into the Ogerpon is going to take it out. But can this Farigiraf actually continue to keep this Urshifu in the game by dealing enough damage to this Gouging Fire?
This is so intense. Okay, so it's going to be a +1 Psychic here from Farigiraf. First of all, does this get the knockout? Let's see.
We're about to find out as the Psychic hits into its target. It's not enough to get the knockout onto the Gouging Fire, but you still have the same predicament if you're Luka, which is that the Farigiraf is on the field.
Okay, so now King Gambit comes out. There has been the howl here on the Gouging Fire, but I don't think it gets the knockout onto Urshifu here. And there's still the Terra as well in Wolfe's End. So actually with the Terra here, I think, you know, close combat onto King Gambit is basically a guaranteed knockout. Gouging Fire doesn't have any attack boost, and so you might need a critical hit, but even with the critical hit, I don't think King Gambit can beat the Farigiraf. Wolfe conserving his Terra really well in this game, I think should put him in a winning position here. But I struggle to see how Luka's actually going to come out of this spot.
Yeah, I don't know my Gouging Fire counts well enough to know how much damage it's going to do against the Urshifu, but at the very least, we get to see this Terastallization come through from the Farigiraf. Terra Fairy is going to help out a lot. I feel like Luka has a good opportunity here to try to go for the Kowtow Cleave into the Farigiraf and see if it can pick up, but it's going to be the breaking swipe first. Farigiraf doesn't take any damage from that either because of the Terra with the crit! Urshifu gets knocked out before it gets a chance to move!
I think it's still fine because Farigiraf with that Terra is what really saves it. It's also faster than King Gambit. King Gambit does hang on with what looks like 1 HP, but critically knocks out that Gouging Fire. Without that Terra, I think we would see Luka win this game. But Wolfe conserving the Fairy Terra all the way until the end, saves him from this King Gambit, and it takes a lot of damage, but it's not enough, and King Gambit's faster here and will secure the knockout.
Wow, that is amazing. What a photo finish for this game number 1. Wolfe able to take it in the very first game of this best of 3, but there's still another game to go.
So many mind games. I'm thinking so much about the turn when it was Incineroar plus Urshifu out against the Rillaboom plus the King Gambit. That was on turn 2. you could make a crazy play if you're on Luka's end. Normally you expect probably something like fake out plus the close combat onto that slot. So Luka was probably trying to wood hammer into Wolfe's Urshifu if I had to guess. But Wolfe makes the perfect play after falling behind a little bit and is able to secure the knockout onto the Rillaboom while taking no damage with Urshifu. I think Luka needs to get a little bit more damage onto Urshifu in the early game.
I agree with that. And even still, though, despite the fact that Luka had to go for some really aggressive reads and maybe got 1 or 2 wrong, he still kept himself in the game because he's going to have to go for the gold if he wants to be able to win this matchup. And he did make a correct call in like turn 3 or 4 that did help keep him alive.
Yeah, this is a game I think that really will kind of come down to key predictions. Yeah, because so much of it is like Urshifu, it exerts so much pressure. Are you able to predict what it does, right? It's going to get one big move off often, and then once it goes for that move, you at least know what it's locked into, but it just applies so much pressure here. So, you know, if you want to responsibly Urshifu, you've got Water Ogre Pawn, but you want to be really careful about going for a Terra with that. Rillaboom is quite good, of course, into the Urshifu. I think something like Rillaboom plus King Gambit could be interesting, but I think it's scary leading King Gambit because, of course, it just suffers from going up against Urshifu in the early game. So I'm curious what adjustments Luka makes. I think the Pokemon he brought in that last game were actually totally fine for the matchup. It's just about execution, and both players were trading crazy plays back and forth.
Is there a world where Luka can force out a Terra early? Because the Farigiraf terastallizing so late in that game number 1 was a huge game winner. Can Luka do anything to try to force out a Terra earlier than that?
Yeah, totally. I think, like, it's interesting because like the Urshifu is just water Terra, right? So I think it's going to be pretty hard for that to Terra defensively. And so you're probably not going to force out a Terra out of that. And then the rest of Wolfe's Pokemon are just really bulky, right? So he probably doesn't feel the need to Terra unless he's threatened by like an immediate one-hit knockout. But all right, here we go. It's going to be King Gambit and the Gouging Fire. Incineroar has hit the field, so it will give the King Gambit a Defiant boost. But we saw how Wolfe was comfortable with this in the previous game, saying, well, I have two Pokemon that resist your dark type attacks, so I don't have to worry about you nearly as much.
What is nice about this as well is that you're a +1, but you're right, like that's not an attack boost that's too uncomfortable to have to play around with a King Gambit. Now though, you have to worry a little bit about this Gouging Fire that is sitting here pressuring off something like a Howl.
Oh, this is really interesting. Once again, we keep talking about the predictions that you're going to make when you are using Urshifu. So, of course, the obvious play here is to just close combat that King Gambit. You can see Wolfe debating, do I want to target King Gambit? Do I want to just target Gouging Fire? I think Fake Out into Gouging Fire in close combat here is relatively safe, but then you risk a Flutter Mane switching in into the King Gambit slot. And so Wolfe is going back and forth. Who does he want to target with this close combat? Does he make the obvious play? And if he makes the obvious play, does the King Gambit pivot out?
I mean, if the King Gambit pivots out, we might get a chance to see the Flutter, but there are no switches on the field right now. It is just going to be a terastallization early, and it is the King Gambit once again here for Luka that's going to get that Terra commit right away.
All right, so that is a big Terra to go for, of course.
So risky.
Yeah, you get the Fake Out now, but is there a Sucker Punch? I don't think so. There's close combat into King Gambit. Is that just a one-hit knockout? Oh, what? It survives!
What a huge survival from the King Gambit. You would expect in these conditions that the Urshifu might be able to get the knockout, but that leaves his King Gambit to go for a +1 count-out cleave with the Dark Terra on top. And Incineroar is going to take half, but that's going to be a good chunk of damage now down onto such a tanky Pokemon.
Yeah, actually targeting the Incineroar rather than the Urshifu there, so maybe expecting Urshifu to go for a U-turn. You know, Wolfe decides, I am just going to play aggressive here. Farigiraf really wants the King Gambit gone. Gouging Fire is in a really awkward spot right now where it just doesn't do very much damage, right? You can Howl, but Incineroar can just switch back in, and so that was a clutch survival on King Gambit, but dealing around 50% to Incineroar, I think Wolfe is probably happy with that trade. And, you know, the main thing now is do you go for Sucker Punch if you're Luka, because Wolfe could, of course, switch in that Farigiraf, and so do play that mind game. I think it's really safe to switch in Farigiraf here. You can see Wolfe is really debating between the moves, but yeah, I think close combat and switch is probably your safest option here. Guarantees the knockout onto the Gambit slot. Looks like, you know, the main question I would have is there a Flutter Mane in the back to take close combat? Because if not, that Gambit should just faint.
Yeah, I love the thought process that we get a chance to see. Is going to work out so well in Wolfe's favor, knowing that the Armor Tail is going to help block Urshifu's damage just a little bit, but with this King Gambit at such low HP, it's going to faint regardless.
I was so curious as to how much damage King Gambit would have done with the defense drop initially on turn 1, as well as the Black Glasses and the Terra and the Defiant boost. But that is King Gambit now out of the way. Wolf still holding on to that Terra advantage. King Gambit's such a crucial Pokemon here. And Wolf deciding to play aggressively this time, saying, you know what, I don't really think you can have actually anything that can switch into close combat really well unless it's Flutter Mane, but no Flutter Mane switching here. Puts Wolf, I think, in a really commanding position. He's up against a lot of physical attackers, but now that King Gambit's gone, it's really free to just cycle in this Intimidate, and there's not that much offensive pressure onto Farigiraf.
Could see the hesitation there too, maybe wanting to go for Trick Room if he thinks that the speed control would be advantageous to have. But at this point, I do feel like Wolf is set up so well to just continue to get this damage down onto Luka's Pokemon, and you also get a chance to set up with the Throat Spray.
Gouging Fire honestly just feels a little bit like a liability right now, but we saw Luka make some cool plays previously where he would go for a Howl, get that immediate attack boost onto the Ogerpon, and then Ogerpon, of course, does have an ability to go for critical hits here as well, right? So let's see if he's able to make a good read this turn, but Luka's definitely playing from behind right now.
I mean, the Intimidate is going to help limit this Ogerpon's attack output, but as you can see, the Howl will come through. It's going to mitigate that right back up to neutral as the Ivy Cudgel goes down into the Farigiraf.
No critical hits.
Crit. That's a huge survival.
Yeah, we were clearly on the same wavelength there. There was, of course, the ability for Wolf to consider setting up Trick Room in that position, but, you know, the fear of setting up Trick Room is knowing that, hey, I still have this Urshifu in the back, so if I set up Trick Room, then it's going to be a little bit awkward to play this endgame with Urshifu. So, you can see there's an interesting play here, which is a Ghost Terra with Incineroar right now. Ghost Terra and Protect, though, can be a little bit risky because Gouging Fire could go for another Howl, and Ogerpon could target the Incineroar slot. So, if Luka makes a hard read here, might be able to swing the tides back into his favor.
He has done that. In game number 1, we saw some big plays come through from this Wellspring Ogerpon, but is Luka going to have the courage to do it again? This Gouging Fire, even though we've seen it get intimidated, it's still there to help out with so much support. As we see this Terrestrialization come through, I wonder if this is going to catch Luka off guard.
Yeah, and Incineroar going for a Ghost Terra, not a very conventional play here, but of course removes the super effective damage from the opposing Water Ogerpon. So, big turn here as Farigiraf goes for Protect.
What happens next? It's up to this Gouging Fire and the...
Oh, Ski Crash, not Howl.
Okay, so that was going to Farigiraf, trying to just pressure a knockout. But now this Ogerpon gets to go for an Ivy Cudgel.
Protect!
No way! That's a swing and a miss.
Yeah, completely trying to deny Trick Room. Wolf basically using the fact that he has Trick Room pressure, saying, well, normally in this spot I could just put on pressure with something like Fake Out and go for Trick Room. And so Luka says, well, if you go for the standard play, I'm just going to get a knockout onto you. But the Protect plus the Terra covers for in case Ogerpon would have targeted that slot. The only thing Wolf really would have lost through there was probably a Howl plus an Ivy Cudgel into the Incineroar slot. But now able to reduce the damage output of the Gouging Fire, and you can cycle Incineroar back in for Intimidate. Wolf has been playing so well so far.
Yeah, you force Luka into a position where if you want to offset that, you just have to keep going for Howl, and then that Gouging Fire is sitting there and doing nothing else. So a fantastic positioning here for Wolf to go ahead and hit the Trick Room button and see if he can get that speed back in his favor. Once he's got the Trick Room up, this Rillaboom can go for some really powerful attacks with Woodhammer.
Yep, so it's going to be Ogerpon actually making the pivot right now. So I do think Rillaboom as Luka's last Pokemon is actually the absolute best Pokemon to keep himself in this game, especially if we see a Howl right now. Let's see if he decides to go for Howl. It is going to be Howl. Rillaboom under Trick Room with this +1 attack honestly is really scary.
That's very scary. Yeah, that's very, very scary. They're both Assault Vest sets, so they're not going to actually be saving each other from any of this physical damage. As the Trick Room goes up, now we have to wait and see how Luka's going to navigate with this +1 Rillaboom.
Yeah, it's interesting because normally Incineroar is your answer to Rillaboom, but now that it's actually Ghost Terra, you do take a little bit more damage, right? And so Wolf, of course, still has a lot of offensive pressure with Rillaboom, but he has to be a little bit careful about how he maneuvers this. For Luka's and conserving that Ogerpon for the endgame to deal with Incineroar as well as Urshifu is also a big deal. So Farigiraf goes for the Protect to start here. Let's see what Luka opted for.
Could go for another Howl if you wanted to be really
right
frisky.
into Rillaboom. Oh my goodness, look at that damage.
50%. You take a little bit of that recoil, but you're still sitting in a really good position. The U-turn comes through to help even up the score, and now it makes a great pivot to get that Incineroar back in to drop the attack once again. You definitely don't want your Urshifu coming in these conditions.
Yeah, absolutely not. So Incineroar now, of course, has Fake Out pressure going into this next turn. You can go for something like a Fake Out plus a Hyper Voice. Grassy Glide from Luka then still completely denied, but the nice double up by Luka predicting the Protect, but this is Gouging Fire's weakness. It's not doing very much damage right now, and Rillaboom cannot protect this next turn, so you are vulnerable to a Fake Out and a Hyper Voice double up onto that slot.
Yeah, there's not really a great switch you can make here either unless you want to forego your Ogerpon. I feel like that's so risky because you might want to have that for an endgame with your Urshifu.
Yeah, and you can see Wolf actually opting for knockoff, so saying, you know what, I can just go for the KO onto your Rillaboom right now. You've already committed your Terra, so I like that play even more than the Fake Out option. And yeah, the one thing here is like Ogerpon could maybe pivot back in. Like I think what Luka wants to do right now is maybe stall out Trick Room because you know, if Rillaboom just goes down right now, it feels like a disaster. But here's just Flare Blitz, so no switch into the Ogerpon. That will get the knockout onto Rillaboom.
Yeah, big knockout there, and the recoil into Incineroar is going to put it into a little bit of a predicament, but I don't think it's in Heat Crash range, even though we saw how much damage came through there, as the Psychic from the Farigiraf is going to be moving first, and Gouging Fire, wow, that is a lot of damage.
And the Gouging Fire is trying its best, but once again, its damage output is lacking. It's mainly here as a support option for the rest of the physical attackers, but I think King Gambit going down as early as it did gave Wolf a huge advantage in this game. Wolf was willing to just lean into aggression in this one, and if you look at what Luka brought, there was just no switching into a close combat, essentially, right? So it's down to Ogerpon and Gouging Fire. Trick Room is coming to an end right now, but Wolf can just Psycho Intimidate in and back out. Ogerpon's going to need to pull a miracle right now for Luka if he wants to advance to the finals.
Well, Gouging Fire is going to go for the Burning Bulwark, so it is able to protect itself to try to stall out these final few turns of Trick Room and maybe even get a burn. The Incineroar isn't actually a fire type anymore, but it's just going to be the parting shot into the Ogerpon because that's really the main damage healer on the team. Gouging Fire has taken a lot of Intimidate drops.
Yeah, it's just done no damage really throughout the course of this battle, and Rillaboom is such a perfect final Pokemon here because the Ogerpon just does very little damage into it, right? You also just baited out the Protect from the Gouging Fire, so this next turn you can just go for something like a Fake Out plus a Hyper Voice. So we'll see if Ogerpon's able to maybe get a critical hit with the Ivy Cudgel right now. It is an increased crit chance, and it does not get it.
Oh, so close. It's barely going to miss its mark on the KO, though, for the Farigiraf, and that looks like it seals the deal here. And Wolf is going to win this game.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's any chance for Luka to win. Like, you probably need to go for a double Protect, at least with Gouging Fire, right? Because with one more turn of Trick Room, you do have Fake Out pressure here. You can also just switch out and Hyper Voice, which is what Wolf's opting to do, saying even if you get the double Protect, well, Urshifu's now pivoted out, so I just close combat you. And so Wolf's switching in this game has been absolutely phenomenal, starting with that turn one play, leaning really into aggression. Ogerpon goes for Spiky Shield, but even if the double comes out from the Gouging Fire, Urshifu will certainly be able to close out this one. There's the Burning Bulwark, and it does not get it, so the Farigiraf here should be able to secure the knockout with Hyper Voice.
Yeah, what a valiant effort here by Luka to be able to preserve this Gouging Fire, but it's just not going to be enough here. And with the Ogerpon as the final Pokemon standing here for Luka, the writing is back on the wall. The Trick Room is over. Urshifu is thriving, and it's going to be a quick knockout.
Close combat comes out, targets into the Ogerpon, and Wolfe Glick will be advancing to his second regional championship finals in just 2 attempts this season, getting second, of course, at Pittsburgh Regionals just a couple of months ago.